Oh, okay, let's go.
The hour 7:30 has arrived. I'd like to start this study session of Urbana School District 116. Roll call, please.
Member Orr.
Here.
Member Hall.
Here.
Member Obalski.
Here.
Member Hasanaka.
Here.
Thank you. Member Carter is here. Vice President Exum.
Here.
And President Pulaski.
Here. Are there any additions, corrections, or modifications to tonight's agenda? No, hearing none. It's time for citizen statements. I'll start off by reading one that was sent in via email from Ruth Kondorovitz. Dear members of the board, at the last BOE meeting on January 18th, a father of a first grader at Leal spoke about his daughter's overcrowded classroom. The father informed the board that there are 27 students in his daughter's classroom, which is about 50% more than the number of students in each of the other two first grade classrooms at Leal. The administration told the father that this class size cannot be reduced since this is the only monolingual first grade class at Leal. Meanwhile, a student in that overcrowded monolingual class tested positive for COVID. As the father pointed out, the situation is unsafe and inequitable. Which brings us back to the subject of the Spanish dual language program. As I wrote to the board before, the DL program is not only inequitable, it also hurts the most vulnerable students in it, the English learners. At the board meeting on December 7th, the administration gave a presentation on the Spanish DL program in its 10-year anniversary. Not a single slide in the presentation talked about how the program improved the academic outcome of the English learners in it. By law, school districts must monitor the progress of all English learners to ensure that they achieve English language proficiency and acquire content knowledge within a reasonable period of time. Surely, if the outcome was successful, the administration would have proudly presented it. Unfortunately, data from the Illinois report card indicates otherwise. The English learners are doing worse academically under the Spanish DL program, as I discussed in a previous letter to the board. The district is required by law to provide English learners with language assistance services in order to help them become proficient in English. For Spanish-speaking ELs in our district, the Spanish DL program replaces the language assistance services. However, in the DL program, kindergarten is taught in Spanish, where the English-speaking students are immersed in Spanish, while the ELs are not learning English. The lower grades are also taught mostly in Spanish. This gives the English speakers the advantage of acquiring a second language quickly at the expense of the ELs. Under the DL program, ELs are much slower at becoming proficient in English. In effect, the district created an enrichment program for native English speakers which exploits English learners using resources that were intended to help English learners. Another consequence of the DL program, which pulls away resources from the language assistance services, is that QAnon all-speaking students are put in the Spanish DL program. In 3 slides at the December 7th presentation on the DL program, the administration referred to the Mayan language, Concobal, thank you, as Spanish dialect. This is an insult to their heritage and history. It is like calling Navajo an English dialect. Putting the Concobal, thank you, students in the Spanish DL program is inappropriate and wrong. If the district truly wanted to help ELs and be equitable, it would give them back the one-way immersion in English with the appropriate services and resources, TBE and TPI, and perhaps create a Spanish after-school program for all. As a non-native English speaker who learned English through immersion at school, I can appreciate how effective immersion is. EL's native culture is not taken away from them during immersion in English at school. It is preserved through their home and in their community. Our district has always been a multicultural community who makes all newcomers feel welcome. When our schools are failing, where less than 10% of the low-income students tested proficient in English and math on the 2019 IAR pre-pandemic. And the same goes for the Hispanic students. Can we really afford the inequitable DL program that benefits the privileged? Sincerely, Ruth Kantorowicz. Does anybody else wish to address the board here in public tonight, here in person tonight? Seeing none. There is no call for an executive session tonight after tonight's meeting. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Roll call, please.
Member Ord,
Yes.
Member Hall,
Yes.
Member Hassanadka,
Yes.
Member Ogalski,
Yes.
Member Carter votes yes, Vice President Exum,
Yes.
and President Pulaski.
Yes, it's time for our student ambassador report. Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Shout out.
He might need to change his position.
Is it okay? Shout outs. I would like to give a shout out to the following people. First, Principal Nance for attending students' AP Prep Biology presentation that included other students and me. It was great. It was a great experience. You can check us out on his Facebook page. Another shout out to Fresh Principal Nance and UHS staff for coming up with great opportunities to take place instead of studio time. Lastly, I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Ivy Tatum, Miss Webster, and Miss Turner for scheduling to meet with 4th and 5th graders at UNCC to answer questions and to talk about what it means to be a woman of black excellence in their position. UMS. I do have a further concern about the safety that students have within our middle school. I have received countless reports on students not feeling safe and not wanting to attend this great school. Again, the main focus of the Board of Education should be student safety. Without that, how can we ensure that students will have the brightest futures possible? Ambassador involvement. I would like to reiterate that I believe it is important for me to attend and support local events as one of the student ambassadors. I have attained this by supporting 5th grade girls basketball. It was a great game. And attending the Urbana School District kickoff balloon release that commemorated the late great Miss Janice Mitchell.
All right, thank you very, very much. There are no administrative reports tonight. No action items as well. So starting off with our study topic, equity audit presentation.
Okay, I am going to, John is pulling it up. Dr. Caffey is actually going to make our introductions and lead this portion of the presentation. Dr. Caffey is in the Zoom. For weather reasons, he is in Normal at his home, and we were afraid he was planning to be here in person, but we were afraid if he was here in person tonight, he would not be able to get home tonight. So he is facilitating via the Zoom. So Dr. Caffey.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity once again to sit in front of the board. I'm going to wait just a few moments. I'm going to allow our first presenter to actually get on the call unless he's in the waiting room. I'm not sure, John, if Dr. Lewis is in the waiting room or not.
They're not.
I know I expressed to him that his start time would be 7:45, but I asked him to log on around 7:40 just in case we ran early. So hopefully he should be on within the next minute or so. But as we wait for him, we're bringing forth two potential consultants tonight at the request of the board following the meeting in November, in which there were some questions about the last consultant that I brought forward. So we will hear from two different firms tonight. The first being Dr. Chance Lewis, who represents Educational Innovations and Solutions. And then the second firm will be the Equity Imperative, in which we will hear from Mr. Matthew Rodriguez and Mr. Edward Morris Jr. And so as soon as those individuals are on the call, I will introduce them. Again, we'll be starting with Dr. Chance Lewis. He's been given the slot from 7:45 until 8:15, and then the second consulting firm will have from 8:15 until 8:45. As we await for those individuals to log on, do we have any questions from the board for me or any member of the task force who may be present?
Board members, any questions?
Dr. Caffey, this is Board Member Carter. Did you have a lot of firms show interest in this, or how did you come about to choose these two specific?
So I returned to my original list, the one that I compiled back in August with the other equity directors of equity at different school districts throughout the state of Illinois. We started off with a list of 15, and then we narrowed that down to a list of 6. And so I returned to that initial list. Out of that list, some were no longer available because they've had too many clients now. So they declined to submit proposals. But we are fortunate to still have the firms coming forth tonight who were willing to submit proposals to us.
Thank you.
And so it looks like we have on the call now. So I will read a brief modified bio that was sent to me. Dr. Chance W. Lewis, the President of Education, Innovation, and Solutions, is the Professor of Urban Education and former Provost Faculty Fellow for Diversity, Inclusion, and Access at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Additionally, Dr. Lewis is the Executive Director of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte's Urban Education Collaborative, which is publishing a new generation of research on improving urban schools. With over 100 published articles in leading academic journals in the field of urban education, and credited with authoring, co-authoring, or co-editing 28 books, Dr. Lewis has provided consultation for over 100 school districts, universities, educational entities, and other organizations across the United States and Canada. Please welcome Dr. Chance Lewis.
Well, good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. First, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight, with Dr. Caffey as well, with his gracious communications with me to get everything set up for tonight. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with you tonight for this very important topic in direction for your school district. Are we able to go ahead and get started, or what's our order?
Yes, sir. The floor is yours.
Okay. Is there a possibility you could give me access to share my screen? Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'll share the screen. So tonight, what I wanted to do for you is to give you a very short overview of a little bit about me and how I usually handle equity audits for previous clients that I have had, and then just open the floor for any questions that you may have of me as we talk through this tonight, and also to better inform your decision as you go forward as well. So just a little bit about me. As you heard in the bio, I am from the great state of Louisiana. I'm a graduate of a high school where many people on the outside of that school didn't really think that students on the inside of the school would be successful. But I am the other side of the sacrifice of many educators and many dedicated community members who really invested in students to be the best that they can be, which really drives my work. And from that particular time, I served as a high school teacher in the great state of Louisiana, as I mentioned, and I was fortunate enough to teach at the high school level for 4 years, and at the end of the 4th year, received Teacher of the Year honors for the state of Louisiana during my time there. From that point, I matriculated and started working on the PhD, which I obtained at Colorado State University. And I was one of the fortunate few that was actually hired as a professor by the same school in teacher education. So preparing teachers to go out into schools to serve students. And then my journey has taken me from Colorado State University to Texas A&M University, and now at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte as well. I must say I am a proud HBCU graduate from Louisiana Southern University. That's my alma mater. So it really helped pave me into the educator I am today. Second thing to know about me, as I said, I not only have taught and doing this equity work, but I also have written about it extensively. Many of the books, as you see, I'm at 30 books now. So 2 more from when he received the bio, but I write about the work that I'm engaged in extensively, and many schools and school districts use many of the materials that I have published as well. In the 100 school districts over 100 school districts that I've worked with before, in that particular time, about 50 plus, a little bit over 50 have consulted with me to do equity audits for that particular school district. And, as I mentioned, these efforts, have led me in my time growing as a high school teacher of the year to professor to now leading international and national initiatives in urban education. So, for example, given my passion for the field and urban education and multicultural education, I founded an international conference on urban education that is held actually every 2 years in different international locations to bring stakeholders together for solutions as well. And then locally, I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, as I work at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. But based on that, locally, serving the local school district here, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, school district size of 143,000 students. I actually serve on their equity committee, their external equity committee of community members, chairing what they call the school composition subcommittee, and that it details as they make plans on attendance zones and what schools students attend, making sure that there are equitable programming at those particular schools as well. Just for time purposes, overview of the equity audit process from previous experiences. I really break it down quickly into 2 phases to make it easy for everyone to understand as well. And this is just based on previous clients. Phase 1, I really work with the school district, school board on their view of the vision, goals, and desired outcomes of an equity audit. What are they looking for? What are the parameters? What do you want to see on the backside of the audit? Then we go into deeper discussions on, what kinds of quantitative data would be made available to me if selected for the opportunity. Then we look at what are the stakeholders, who are the stakeholders that would be made available to collect what we call qualitative data, who I can interview and kind of get another viewpoint on what's going on in the district as well. So that's phase 1, just an overview of the outcomes, just getting a good sense of data that will be made available, and then stakeholders who the district would make available to me, and how can I access them, and just more the logistical side. In phase 2, basically what I do, this is the reporting out, because usually most school districts that I work with want to report. And as I mentioned in my initial letter to you, the majority of the school districts that I've worked with, when they have engaged with me to do the equity audits, many of them have set up a situation where I would do a non-disclosure, or they did a non-disclosure agreement with me. Basically, what that just meant is that I would not release any portions of the report publicly on any websites or anything, and then the report just went directly to their point of contact, whether it's a board member or their designee as well. So you will not see, in all of my materials, you will not see references to that because of that, this kind of legal agreement that they usually put forward as well. But in the reports, kind of as a framework, I usually provide background on the visions and goals that I was informed about initially, kind of lay out the kind of quantitative and qualitative results of data that was made available to me. And then one of the things I pride myself on in my work is providing specific recommendations by the key stakeholders that are involved, okay? And when I mean specific recommendations, laying out, okay, from this point forward, I always call it starting tomorrow, here are the specific recommendations, and I just kind of go on the roll call of the stakeholders. So it could be board members or principals or your superintendent or whoever the stakeholder is that we have agreement on who is the audience for this particular report as well. And then based on that, whether it's through persons who have been made available to me, if it were site visits or what have you, basically all the recommendations are tangible on immediate next steps, okay? And then once there's agreement, we could look at immediate, kind of short-term, long-term, whatever kind of time periods we want addressed in that as well. And then the last thing that I do to kind of pride myself in the work, even if it goes past the contract period, this is just me as a personal educator as well. I always like to just check in on previous clients that I've worked with to kind of see how they are doing even after the contract term based on the recommendations as well. So, just going out and just checking on and making sure everything is still good, or if there are other ways I could be of service as well. So in closing, this as a overview of it, I'm a firm believer as we work with students, and provide equitable opportunities and equitable pathways. Pretty much there's only 3 pathways that we're going to send our students as well. One pathway, we're going to prepare them for college. That's definitely one pathway. Another pathway will be for them to be workforce ready. And then unfortunately, the other pathway is a pathway to prison or funeral if we do not act. And so as we start to look at this, these are just 3 basic pathways that have guided my work. So it's just ultimately about, we think about things like equity audits and programming and things that we put forward currently and in the future, is what pathway are we sending our students on? And I am a living example of when things are put in place properly, because I did not have the picture perfect kind of situation as a student going into a school district, but it's because of what was laid out and those support of those great educators. I'm doing the things that I do today as well. So this is my contact information, and I'll share this information afterwards as well. But I will turn it back over to you to open the floor for any questions for me.
Board members, ambassadors, do you have any questions or comments? Anyone? Brian?
Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for that presentation. I have a couple questions. I wonder if you can, I understand the non-disclosure agreements prohibit you from talking details, but can you give us some tangible examples of the types of things that we might find in a report, the types of analyses that you'd be doing, just so we can have a little bit of a better sense of what it might look like on in the final product?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very fair question, and not going into the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement part, but from a framework perspective, each of the clients previously had their own preference of how they wanted the report set up. But I would say the greatest majority of school districts have had me look at 3 kind of phases of programming, and I will call it those programs that are what I call advanced level, so access to higher level courses, those college prep courses, what are the kind of equity kind of concerns and outcomes that are there. So based on data that they provide for me from a system-wide, school district system-wide perspective, kind of laying out analyses of, are all students able to access those kind of college preparatory courses at the same level? And then if the answer is yes, then the question then becomes, how can we expand it even more? If the answer is no, okay, what are the barriers, what are the roadblocks, and then what are recommendations to improve that, okay? My second most requested area is really looking at issues around school disciplinary practices and who actually, gets the most disciplinary practices. Are there kind of trends in that particular data? Are there trends by school, all the way down to, depending on the data that's provided to me, are there trends by particular teachers, as well? So that's the second most requested area as well. And then the third most requested area that I have seen across the school districts that I have worked with, which has been particularly surprising to me, is how the allocations of resources are distributed across the district, whether it be financial resources, human resources, or any other levels of resources that have impact on outcomes of students as well. So, for example, when we look at students in their particular schools, when I go back to that phase one, I talked about access to AP, we could look within and across the school district, whether it's middle school or high school, when we look at where the students are coming from and looking at the programming in the students, does the student, no matter their address, have the same access to the same level of resources within and across the district? So that's the third, most requested area that I usually see in many of the equity audits as well. So hopefully that answers your question, to kind of give you a sense of, what's usually requested of me without, me breaking the NDAs that I have in place.
Dr. Lewis, I have a question for you. And do you have actually a timeline for, let's say, phase one or phase two, like from start to finish for each of these timelines? Like, if we did hire your firm, what are we looking at as far as time,
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So usually what I do, because I get that question quite often, I usually kind of quote unquote start the clock once I receive all of the information, once we had an agreement on what will be made available and when do I receive it. And then also, who do I have access to, in the district to do, interviews and, just ask questions, so on and so forth. But once I have all the information, I'm pretty efficient on my end. So I usually kind of turn everything around with the report, back in the hands of the school board or the designee in a range of 4 to 6 weeks. Then that everything is back to you with the report as well. And so, I usually try to remain pretty efficient in doing that. The reason why is because I know, based on the report, then decisions have to be made. And so just kind of given my passion for the work, that's why I turn it around efficiently so it can move along in the process of implementation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about your qualitative work? What does that look like? Is that in person? What kind of stakeholders are you planning to work with? What does that look like for you?
Yes. So as far as the stakeholders, once we come to agreement if selected based on the goals and outcomes of the equity audit and what we're trying to accomplish then we would come to agreement on the types of stakeholders I'm looking for. So it could range from school board members all the way down to, people in the, different school buildings, to family members, even if they want to make students available. That's just a decision that we would just come to agreement on. And then from that point, once we kind of come to agreement, I say, okay, here are some stakeholders that would be beneficial to, what the projected outcomes are. Then from that point, then usually the designee from the school district will say, okay, we have the persons in each of the designated categories. And, pre-COVID, I was doing interviews in person. During COVID, I've been doing them virtually, as well. So it's just, it's just a matter of, who is made available. But the stakeholders will really touch the different levels that are directly tied to what we agree to the outcomes of the equity audit as well.
Laura, please.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I just wanted to go on the other side of that coin and talk a little bit about the quantitative data collection. And I was curious if you could speak a little bit about your team in that regard, and also what kind of software you plan to use for the data set analysis.
Yeah, so great question. So for the quantitative side, usually what has happened in previous cases, most districts, depending on the size, they usually, all have a data person or a staff that, kind of serves as a point for me for data collection. So once I have come to agreement with the school board and say, okay, here are kind of the data that we have available around kind of those aforementioned top 3 areas or whatever, kind of categories we're going to look at, then the data person pulls that data for me. And then depending on the format that they provided to me in, some give it to me where it's easy and usable. Some of them, I've had to do, more work on that side to kind of clean up the data for analysis. So depending on that, usually I can put quantitative data in, things like SPSS, or, some have made it easy where it was already disaggregated and ready to go. So it just really depends on the format that I get it in. And so, but I run all my analysis through SPSS for quantitative data. And then with my team, usually what happens, given the sensitivity of the data, when I come to agreement with a school district, I say usually how are they most comfortable, right? So for example, if they only want me to see the data, right, then I don't let any other team members see it. But if there's other members of my staff that the school district is comfortable seeing, having them see the data, and we sign whatever agreements that we need to sign, then they know who the exact team members, on my end will also be accessing the data as well, because given the frequency where I've done these, I know it's very sensitive information as well. So it's just more about, what we agree to, on that side as well. And I've had both where I only see it, or myself and other staff members see it as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Go ahead, Ann.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Lewis, for your presentation. I have,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have two questions. One is, how do you form your recommendations to the district once you've finished your audit? And what form do the recommendations take? And then also, do you provide benchmarks for the district to measure their own progress based on the recommendations you've given, and timelines to reach those benchmarks? Because I'm assuming, you're coming to our district, so you'd be looking at K through 12, which is a lot of grade levels. And if we want to truly work with equity, we want to start as early as possible. So of course, those kind of, measures might take longer time. So do you provide a framework? Do you give us homework to do once you're all finished?
Great question. Yes, there's always homework, right? But when we look at this, as I was going back in my earlier comments, when I lay out the recommendations, uh, the way I write them is from a kind of timestamp viewpoint, right? So, for example, we start with okay, the immediate, and then we kind of define what would be quote unquote short term, whether that's 2 to 4 weeks, kind of in the middle, and then long term, and then we kind of put these timestamps in there. But based on the data that I receive and then what I'm writing from, then when we look at particular benchmarks, what I usually try to do with each benchmark that we set based on each recommendation, usually what I put in the reports are what I call recommended date for implementation, right? And then so it could be, let's just say, for example, like one I just wrote recently, let's say within 90 days, okay? And then basically what it does, it gives the school board and district latitude to say in that particular time period, based on all the moving pieces that we need to have, at least we have a time stamp on when we would implement this, right? And then, given that I'm not a district employee, but by putting that timestamp, then at least school boards and others within the district can say, hey, where are we in meeting this kind of timestamp that Dr. Lewis put forward, in the recommendation, since it's, kind of clear on what the action is, from that particular standpoint. So that's usually how I do it, to make it simple for no matter whomever the stakeholder is, that there is a timestamp that's available for them to, make decisions, put things in place, and then, have a reporting out. And usually what I've done in the report, since that's in the written format, usually it's also accompanied by a presentation to the board or whomever the necessary stakeholders are, to kind of walk them through findings and the recommendations. And then, they can ask any clarifying questions. And then we kind of put together the kind of plan going forward, from that point. So great question.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
If Ann was done, I have a question.
Go ahead, Ravi.
All right, so how many years of data do you recommend is adequate to do the quantitative analysis? Because just my kind of assumption is that you really need a lot of data, like up to 10 years or so you can see in a cohort of students at like the elementary level, maybe at kindergarten, first grade, they're on par, but then there's a divergence that occurs and you won't see the results of that till they get to high school or middle school. So, I mean, is 1 or 2 years enough, or do you need to do more like 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And usually well, let me respond to it this way so it makes it easier for everybody to understand. I always request the most data as possible, but oftentimes that is limited by data collection because oftentimes yes, it would be great to follow students from kindergarten through high school to kind of see, but two kind of main barriers I see in school districts. One, they may not have been collecting data that long on whatever we have agreed to look at, okay? And then the second issue is that if it's program specific, oftentimes many of the programs were not in place in that time period as well. So usually I have to get the most data for the time period based on what we're looking at. So in some cases it's 1 to 2 years, some is 5, some is 7. It's just more about what's available, because oftentimes too, to match the reality of what like the school board wants and then what the data collection person say they have is oftentimes not equal, right? So we just have to come to agreement on what that looks like, as well, based on the data that's available. But I always request, of course, the most data as possible, but is when the asking of data meets the reality of what's available that we just have to figure out.
Two other questions along those lines. When you mentioned program specific, as before you got on, there was a public comment about the dual language program, which I think a lot of people think is very successful, but there's also some criticisms of it.
Sure.
So being able to look at, for example, how native Spanish speakers do within the program versus ones that may not have been in the program, or conversely, the
Sure.
non-native Spanish speakers in the program versus those not in the program. I mean, that is something you're capable of looking at, I assume,
Well, kind
if
of
we give you the data.
goes back to what I just said.
It's been a 10-year program, so we have
Yeah,
people in 10th grade now that started in kindergarten.
yeah. So then when I had a conversation with the data person, I asked the question, okay, what kind of format or are the 10 years of data available for a person like myself? And then, and if I'm just using the example that you mentioned to kind of look at how Spanish students are doing, versus, other students, then we would have to do what I call kind of match pair design, how similar can we make the two groups as well? So for students that are on this side, I need the equivalent as much as possible for the same kind of student, let's just say same grade, same, profile, that outside of the language, category, that then we can make, fair comparisons on how one group is doing, versus another as well. And in a school district that I recently did, we had we called it the intervention group, of course, the control group. And then I had another group that I had the school district pull, is that give me another group of students that are similar to this group, but then also did not have access to the intervention as well. So I kind of look at it in comparison to similar students versus kind of cherry picking, this group over this group. But that's kind of gets deeper into the weeds, where I'm talking kind of that language with the data person as well.
And what, so I'm a medical doctor, and in our
Sure.
literature, we do propensity matching, which I think is what you're talking about. That's the term we use, but
Yeah.
that's really good. So kind of along those lines, things that you might find, going back to Brian Ogalski's question, without giving details of prior things, but things you might find are potentially, if a reading interventionalist was assigned to this student earlier on, they may not have strayed from the path of a similar cohort patient or student. Doctor is a patient or student. And similarly, like if these students had their IEPs made earlier in elementary, they may have done better than, diagnosing them and figuring it out in like 8th grade.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're asking, with the medical kind of background to it as well. And the thing where it's a little different from the medical side to the education side is that when we look at the program, what usually happens in education circles, as you may see, like in clinical trials, is that students may come into the program or district at different time periods, right? So we would have to isolate, if we're looking across 10 years, we have to look at, okay, who are the students that have been in the program for 10 years fully, in comparison to, the comparison group, has been in 10 years. But then you have another thing that's going on, another phenomenon where students are coming in at different points. They have different staff members, and then we assume, across schools that the programmatic offerings, even though it's the same program, are the same at different schools, right? Which is often not the case, right? So you got to kind of control for those variables with different, stakeholders who are working with the teachers as well. So it's not just a simple, you were in a 10, they were in a 10, who did better, right? You got to kind of control for these other factors as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, somebody who's a native Spanish speaker that starts in kindergarten will do much better than somebody that just came from Guatemala in 5th grade.
Exactly.
So another question, just because I think we're almost to the end of your time, but I just want to ask this. So a criticism I've heard several times when we're talking about equity things is you can't use data from last year because it was during COVID where everybody was at home and remote education. To me, I think you should really use that data because that actually amplifies the disparities.
Mhm.
I mean, what are your thoughts about numbers during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, just like in a clinical trial, each set of data has context, and you have to proper contextualize it, for that as well. But if you're going to use COVID data, particularly across groups, then you're going to have to make sure you factor in a control for, access to technology, access to the support services during that particular time period where a lot of that was limited, as well. So all of these factors, just like if everything was in the perfect world, you still have to control for some factors. So in COVID situation as well, you have to have those discussions about, what was made available to students, that they all had the same access, that they all had the same support, and kind of, figure out how that's going to look from the analysis standpoint as well.
All right, thanks. I was just really hoping that you would say that you would go down to like building specific, classroom specific data.
And
Because I think the quantitative is very important. Qualitative is telling your story or whatever, but I think the quantitative is where you actually see a difference with the intervention.
And I agree. And, goes back to my earlier comment is if it's available, to be able to be provided to me. That's the key variable that, the data person in the district will have to be able to answer as well. Okay.
One
Any
more
other
question.
questions?
Yeah, I know we're almost out of time. Just one more question for you, if you don't mind. You've several times said, the data that's made available to you and the stakeholders made available to you. I'm wondering if you can tell us about your role in identifying the data and the stakeholders versus the district. So who's running the show in terms of identifying, or is it a mutual thing? What level of guidance will you give us in terms of identifying data points and people?
Yeah, great question. And I know you're short on time, so I answer it quickly. So once we reach agreement on the goals and outcomes of the equity audit, then I would put in a request on here are the types of data that I would need to make this happen, right? And then once I have that conversation with the data person, they will either say yes, no, or let me work on it if they can get me that. And then usually that designee will come back to me based on what I submit on here's what we can do, as well. And then we just kind of figure out from that point and then make sure all the necessary stakeholders from the board and wherever else, are in agreement with here's what we're going to make available based on what we have. Here's what he originally requested, and then, come to a decision, and then we just move forward from that point.
Right, any other quick questions? Thank you very, very much, Dr. Lewis.
Okay, you all have a great evening. I wish you all the best, and I'm here if you need anything. Everybody take care.
Dr. Lewis, and I will follow with you in the following week.
Okay, thank you. Everybody have a good night.
Right. Next on our agenda, we will hear from the Equity Imperative. Representing the Equity Imperative tonight, we have Mr. Matthew Rodriguez. I read his brief bio, and it states that Mr. Rodriguez is a teacher. In his nearly 2 decades of experience in education, he has served as a math tutor, math and social studies teacher, teacher leader, an assistant principal, and ultimately was the principal for 7 years in the Humboldt Park community of Chicago. There he learned that education is, for many of our youth, the difference between life or death. The imperative nature of education in this context captured his imagination and frames how he continues to prepare leaders in schools today. Matthew transitioned from the high school setting to a national role in designing and implementing curricula to support educational leaders to have the highest impact with their student populations before he transitioned back to Chicago to become the Chief Executive Education Officer for a small district. Mr. Rodriguez is joined tonight by Mr. Edward Morris, And his bio reads that Mr. Edward Morris Jr. is a passionate about building the capacity of leaders who carry a vision for changing lives and fulfilling social, enterprise-centric missions with excellence. Ed committed to his passion first serving as a teacher, then as a principal and aspiring principal developer and coach in Chicago. He brings to the Equity of Imperative several years of insight and influence in education reform, having served in director and executive roles for 3 national education nonprofits, which are the New Leaders, Leap Innovations, and Branch Alliance for Educator Diversity. Through Visionport LLC, where he serves as president, he is honored to team with and work for the Equity Imperative and the organizations that they partner with. Please welcome Mr. Matthew Rodriguez and Mr. Edward Morris Jr.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Caffey, and good evening to you. And please help me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Rabi Hasanatka and Erica Uskali. Okay, I'm just making sure. Good evening to you all. Hopefully you all did your groceries and you're ready for this snowstorm that's coming through this evening. And thank you for dedicating some time and affording us the opportunity to be here with you tonight, to share this proposal, to share some thoughts and ideas, and really just offer what it is that we have to potentially bring to the table through the Equity Imperative. It's okay with you, I'd like to share my screen. I'm disabled at the point right now to be able to do that. We have a small PowerPoint together with you, so that way we can kind of maneuver through, honor your time, and make sure that we can still have some conversation towards the end. You know, just in thinking about this evening and thinking about the potential work that we would engage with you, this is all about partnership toward empowerment. Just to be clear, if it doesn't come across in our presentation this evening, the main point that we're proposing is not to do an equity audit for you, but it's to do an equity audit with you. And we're going to talk a little bit about why we believe that's the appropriate approach, especially given these times, especially given the needs, especially given the hurt and pain that many of our students and families experience when they attend our schools. You heard a little bit about mine and Mr. Morris's background, just to share a little bit more context about why we're taking this approach of a partnership toward empowerment. I want to leave some space for Ed just to share a few more thoughts myself, and then we'll jump right into some of the nuances of the proposal.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Dr. Caffey. Appreciate the opportunity to join you all tonight. Just to color a little bit about my background with regards to our passion for empowerment, I would dare say that I learned having done program evaluation, program design, and having visited many cities and districts across the country, serving in an auditor seat as a program exec for the organizations that I've been a part of. I've discovered at the sustainable part of leaving legacy with a district that is really going to do work that is ready for change, that is going to endure, that is going to last. My experiences have taught me that work happens when we walk alongside to equip, to get out of the way. And I would say that not only have I had that experience with districts, but as a vice president, the last organization, the Branch Alliance for Educator Diversity, where I was responsible for doing audits for colleges of education at minority serving institutions across the country. That gave me just an entirely different lens because the audits were done in collaboration with the deans and the presidents for the purpose of working with those universities for 3 years to bring about holistic, whole-scale transformation. So I just want to give a little bit of that background that's not mentioned there, but it positions the passion that I know I have And Matthew, I'll turn over to you to share a little bit with regards to just the rationale about doing the work with those that we partner with.
Yeah, and this is, we have to share, and Dr. Caffey, shared a little bit about our bios, but I'm sure as you're vetting various potential vendors, you want to know their credentials and where they come from, their experience, their background. So one additional piece that I would just add to what Mr. Morris is saying, myself and a colleague recently authored a chapter in a book. The book is called, I'm not asking you to buy the book, but this is a book called Strengthening Anti-Racist Educational Leaders. And the chapter that we wrote is really ensuring that people are developing anti-racist skills, awareness, understanding as a core competency for educational leaders. Right now, this work that leaders are attempting to accomplish is really right now at the behest of potential vendors. And I feel like that's detrimental to the students and to the families that the district is serving. I believe that these skills, like an equity audit, are ones that leaders should already have and should be able to employ whenever it is that there's a need to engage in such audit, which is, again, why we are pushing to do an equity audit with you and not for you. A little bit about the equity imperative. Ultimately, it's about supporting educators, supporting practitioners, and interrupting inequitable systems. I'm sure that you've heard that time and again with the various other vendors that you've been engaging, but we have a specific theory of action. Our theory of action is embodied in our logo. The first aspect that we attempt to engage district partners, educational leaders, or other organizational leaders is all about illuminating, which is about equipping practitioners to illuminate the systems and structures that constantly perpetuate racial inequality. The second aspect is to indicate, which is all about empowering practitioners to indicate the research-based strategies to address the inequities that they just were illuminated to. And then finally, to navigate, to engage practitioners in systems thinking and planning to assure system-wide change. Like Mr. Morris was mentioning, complete and holistic transformation. The words that I bolded here are really a part of our core, which is all about equipping. It's all about empowering, and it's all about engaging. Just to share a little bit of context around potential partnership, we attempted to capture it in a graphic form. And what I'm showing to you here is just a small excerpt of some of the work that we're doing across the United States right now, predominantly in the state of Massachusetts, but also here in the state of Illinois. We're working with schools, school districts, and also state agencies in really helping them to realize their desire to become anti-racist and to be able to ensure that their organization is lifting up their desires towards equity. And right now we have thought partnership and support. We develop professional learning, district-wide, statewide, and also for individual schools. And we also do work with students from the middle school up through high school, developing skill sets around youth participatory action research. So that way students themselves can be empowered to name challenges that they're faced with, identify, indicate some of the research-based solutions, and then navigate some of those solutions, and they themselves being a part of those solutions. In terms of the work that we're proposing with your school district, it's really focused on the strategic thought partnership and support. And so when you think about this equity audit, it's truly a dynamic approach. It's a potential dynamic partnership approach, collaborating and equipping those involved to engage deeply. I'll share with you here, and then I'll turn this over to Ed to talk about the phases that you saw in the proposal. The general areas of focus that are listed here and also in the proposal, they're coming from a set of research, a set of frameworks. You can find some of these areas of focus also in the work of Richard Valencia, in his work of students of color in the achievement gap. He identifies 9 key areas around systemic inequality. And these are some of the areas that we focus on using the research to guide even our own lens in making sure that we're focused on the right areas to help you begin to illuminate, indicate, and navigate systematic solutions for students and families. In terms of the phases, let me turn this over to Mr. Ed Morris.
Thank you, Matthew. Go ahead and next slide. So everyone, we do propose to take an audit and work it with the district in 5 parts or phases, if you will. One of them start off first with planning with key stakeholders. And when we say key stakeholders, we mean more than just central office personnel. We do mean key stakeholders taken from the key dimensions of the entire Urbana district community. And then after that, getting into the quantitative and the qualitative analyses that takes place, particularly with surveys and interviews and artifact analyses, ending with a report and strategic planning phase that's more than just a meeting and hand over to you something that is archivable. But our desire is to be able to actually end with something that is actionable for the entire district to engage in over multiple years. Next slide. And so speaking to planning with stakeholders, we start off, as you heard Matthew speaking to the fact that we have a very strong focus with empowering and equipping. We would start off phase 1 with really rich thought partnership with Dr. Kathy and any other designees from the district to help bring together a work group that is going to lead the work in the district. And we will come alongside to not only help with solicitation and building out a roadmap, as well as like a kickoff to celebrate and to formally announce that this is happening as a district-wide initiative, but then also engaging that work group to help with the design of auditing tools and structures and processes. So again, within the district, there's capacity building that is taking place from the very beginning to the very end. So we would even desire from the district to even co-facilitate the kickoff, to co-facilitate work sessions, to do the building of the tools, looking at what's available to use and what you all think would be best for use for your particular context, because not every tool is fit for every district. And we've discovered that. We preach it, we coach it, but making sure that you all are fully equipped to use and extract what is right for your context. Next slide. The quantitative analysis component would be the portion that at the equity imperative, we would do the majority of that work. However, we would start off with the build out of a full collection and analysis plan with the district, as well as ending this particular phase with co-facilitation, with more than just a review of what the findings were, but taking the district through an initial process of identifying key priorities that could potentially situate the work in the 5th phase and beyond. So again, that is interwoven throughout the particular processes where there is co-facilitation of sessions with the district leads, so that we can help, again, build capacity along the way. Go ahead for the next one. And engaging the voice of the district. Now, we will say that this, for us, we would want to dedicate the most time to, because we wouldn't want there to be a surface, typical traditional approach of extracting a full set of like key stars in the district, from teachers to principals. No, we would love to have the capacity to work with Dr. Kathy and other designees to go even into the community to extract the voice of the students, the support personnel, parents, community members, and others that are contributing to the collective vision of Urbana School District. And so this particular phase, we would want to partner with Dr. Cathy to actually do a little bit of a leading of a learning session on the best practices around focus groups and empathy-based interviewing and how to rightly apply and analyze the information that comes out of those particular constructs, as well as coaching any particular set of project leads on the administration of this work, so that again, capacity building around engagement is being optimized. And again, ending with a facilitation of a session to bring back to the leadership as well as other interested key stakeholders with regards to the findings as we're building the report along the way. Next set. And here is a little bit of a nuance that I have discovered. It's different, especially coming out of the work that Matthew spoke to with Dr. Valencia, where you begin to do an analysis by means of observation and critiquing artifacts and practice, so that you can really see what the truth is behind policies and practices and procedures, and seeing where there may or may not be gaps or alignment with regards to what is projected with regards to equitable practices and what's actually in place. So we would love to lead this work with the district, and again, doing this alongside fully equipping, fully coaching on how to take all these different components, pulling it together, doing a rich triangulation, especially with the data that has been collected quantitatively, so that there could be, in this next phase, Matthew, a final report and build out that is action-based. Here's what we would love to do with you all is to be on the point of generating a final draft, co-facilitate a formal debrief for executive leadership, other lead stakeholders, but then recruit, so to speak, to pull the right people into a few prioritization and strategic planning sessions that are focused on implementing a vision that is centered around equity-based goals. And that would come out of the collection of all of the work from the previous 4 parts of the audit. And so that's what we mean when we say we want to come alongside and do this work with you as opposed to for you, and then just giving you something that is archivable. It would end with a robust strategic plan that you all should be able to quickly turnkey and put into action. And with that, Matt, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to color or speak to, but that's it.
Yeah, the only other thing that we put in there, you'll notice in the proposal, there's a proposed set of time. Of course, you know, we're here now in February presenting, but this was what we had proposed when this was originally an opportunity. This timeline obviously would have to be adjusted in the event that there's a decision to move forward. But other than that, we wanted to make sure there was plenty of space for questions, reactions, thoughts, and et cetera. Dr. Cathy?
Board members, Ambassador, are there any questions? Who'd like to start? Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks very much for your presentation. We were, of course, unable to see past examples of your work, maybe because, you know, of non-disclosures or whatever might be happening. So I wonder if you can share with us some sort of tangible examples of the types of analyses that you'd be doing, and what types of data you would be looking for and how you would approach that.
Yeah, great question. So two things I'll share. There are 4 school districts currently right now that we're partnered with in depth in providing professional development. Typically, the equity imperative is engaged after a school district has already done an equity audit. And our organization is engaged to help provide some of the solutions that the equity audit has found. What we're proposing, just to be clear, we have never done this degree of depth of equity audit for a school district that we're working with. I want to be 100% clear about that. But I'll also say that the equity audits that we have done have been predominantly in the quantitative and qualitative aspects that you hear proposed here. And in that, we've been able to generate the kind of detail necessary for us to customize some of the professional learning that we're providing. So you talked about not having access to tangible examples. It's for two reasons. One, even those kind of lesser sized equity audits that we have done for districts, for non-disclosure reasons, we cannot share those. But also you do not have examples because what we are proposing is something that this organization is yet to do.
Laura?
Thank you for your presentation. I think in efforts of consistency, I will ask the same question. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the quantitative data collection, how you and your team go about that, and what kinds of software you use to attain your data collection sets.
So quantitatively, we look at data that's predominantly public. Schools, school districts, we look at performance, achievement rates. Quantitatively, we look at where teachers are placed in terms of their credentials and if it's in alignment with where they're actually teaching. We don't right now have, SPSS utilization or need for that. We don't run regression equations. It's a pretty simple mathematical approach to where we see gaps in regards to equity with various forms of identity. Predominantly, our organization focuses in on identifying where those gaps are showing up with subgroups racially. But in terms of like having a robust system through which to run regression equations, the math that we do is not, it does not require for that degree of mathematical software. Which, if I could just add one last thing, a part of the reason for that is not just because of what we can or cannot do. I know myself, I've been trained in those quantitative analysis areas of work, and so I'm familiar with how to do those things. But again, our effort is to really truly equip and empower the leaders who are in the school district, which our work will not require in the future for the school district to invest in that kind of software to run this kind of mathematical analysis. It's to give a lens, it's to give some tools through which to analyze what's already in front of us in order for us to act responsibly and consistently when it comes to executing equity within the school district.
Thanks for your presentation. I did have a quick question too, and I know we don't have a lot of time left. But so I know you can't share, you mentioned you've done some smaller audits and you can't share the specifics of those particular districts, but can you tell me the scope of your actual work? Like, did you use some of these pieces that are here as a part of that audit and not others, or kind of what did you do for those smaller districts or the smaller audits that you did with the other districts?
Yeah, great question. So the audits that we have done, if you think about the phases that Mr. Ed Morris just outlined, there's a component that we're proposing, which is really engaging the district community, where we're interviewing students, where we're engaging with focus groups, with teachers, where we're doing observations and looking for gaps between what is present in an artifact versus what shows up in reality as it relates to the academic programming, as it relates to instructional strategies that are happening inside of classrooms. Those components, that's the degree of nuance that we have not done in other districts. What we have done is look at student achievement in the various aspects, predominantly that are public. In our partnership, we do connect with the district leaders to give us insight and access to data that is also not public, which is where it becomes a discretionary factor to not be able to share some of the information. But, looking at student achievement, looking at quote unquote teacher quality, and also looking at where it is that budgetary decisions are being made. Those are some of the broader areas that we've done quantitatively with the other districts. And again, some of the more nuanced interviews, focus groups, and et cetera, are the areas that we have yet to do.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Go ahead, Ann.
Hello, thank you both for your presentation. I'm going to also be consistent and ask you a question that I asked our previous presenter, which was, do you have a method of providing recommendations for your districts and benchmarks for your districts to try and meet based on the goals that they want to achieve, and timelines for those benchmarks so that we know that we're doing the work that we need to do to achieve what we were setting out to achieve?
Yes. Yes, we do have examples of that. The largest school district that we're working with, and I shared this also, and I'll share it with you all as well. Although we cannot share the material, the product, so to speak, in the event that you're ever interested in even connecting with one of the superintendents who we're working with, I know that they'd be more than happy to share with you what the partnership has been like. One of the largest districts is in Lynn, Massachusetts. It's 26 schools in an urban district. And like I said, in the event that that is an interest of yours to connect with and talk with any of those superintendents, I'm sure they'd be happy to share. But in that work, we do propose recommendations. We do not only analyze, we not only thought partner, but we do also give them a sense of what's the best next step for them. I don't know, Ed, if you want to share a little bit even of the work that we're doing with one of the school district cabinets, focused in on their work around how to ensure that their emerging bilinguals are more successful in the district.
Yes, we do generate reports that, again, we use with cabinet members to meet with them and to set dates to set up next steps, to discuss if those next steps are even the best moves given the context of the district and information that we may or may not have had privy to. That's just one example. I'm also reminded of an organization, well, another school district that we did work with for their special ed department, where I was really brought in along with Matthew to equip the special ed director and a work group across the executive cabinet to turn around reports from the state with regards to removing some of the numbers for disproportionality with placement. And so that has been, again, like a work alongside with that particular group of leaders to benchmark, to do more than just, okay, well, we've got this document, but how are we going to actually get it done? Putting certain individuals on the hook to actually attend to the work that has been captured inside of a design strategic plan for the next 2 or 3 years. So those are just some examples, but yes, we definitely do that work.
Hi, I was wondering if you could kind of speak to the qualitative analysis in terms of, how do you construct who is represented in the focus groups, how that data is distilled and then presented into your final report.
Sure, yeah, a couple thoughts to share with that. You notice in phase 1, it's all about engagement of a stakeholder group. This stakeholder group is, I'm sure comprised of a series of leaders within the school district, but as Ed Morris mentioned a moment ago, not just the stars, but potentially even folks who, have a perspective that would be valuable with regard to engagement of an equity audit. In terms of identifying those who would be, engaged or, recruited to participate in focus groups for that qualitative analysis, we would start with the stakeholder group in identifying who are the right voices to ensure that we're there? What's the best approach in terms of outreach to engage them? What's the best thing that's maybe worked in the district in the past? So that way, in the event that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and there's already a mechanism through which to engage, the district stakeholders, then that's one of the methods that we would use to identify people for focus groups. We would utilize and equip the people who would lead those focus groups with a method through which to engage, asking the right questions, having the same question set for all the same focus groups, being able to document those questions, responses, recording them audio-wise and otherwise, so that way we can have the data to analyze. What we would look for, and we would, use our method to ensure that we can extract themes, we can extract highlights, we can extract patterns from what the different focus groups are saying, and that's how we would distill it to produce a report with regard to what the community is saying.
And any other questions, Brian?
I just need to clarify what you just said, just to make sure that I'm following. So you are not yourselves conducting any of the interviews. We as a district will be doing all data collection, both quantitative and qualitative. Is that what you're saying?
No, there's some aspects that we would be involved with. I don't know, Ed, if you wanted to speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, with the quantitative and the qualitative analysis, again, that would probably be the one time that we would come in to work alongside with a work group within the district to help complete that process, because we've discovered that typically cannot be done in isolation. So no, you wouldn't be responsible for having it done. We would say that you would definitely be responsible for getting us access. And that would be key in getting the right people the access to the data and to the different types of artifacts that we would have asked for.
Any further questions?
I have a question. So what would you say is your strongest forte, like your biggest selling point? I mean, from what I'm hearing, it's probably doing these qualitative analysis in the focus groups and then providing professional development to move forwards. Is that what it is, or what do you think?
So what's our strongest? Well, the most work that we do is around providing professional development.
And so where you decide what is the appropriate professional development for a given district you're looking at is really coming from these focus groups on what you feel. I mean, what comes out of that is what is needed.
Through the analysis, through their own articulations, through their own data, through their own work, they identify predominantly, like I mentioned, typically the equity imperative is engaged after an equity audit has been completed. And the work that we provide is ensuring that they're meeting the solutions based on whatever recommendations that they've been given. And that's been the majority of the work that we've been engaged with thus far.
Well, then how do you measure if any change occurred? Is it just the perceptions of these stakeholders that's changed over time? Or are you basing it off of, the Illinois report card, or performance numbers, disciplinary numbers, or how do you measure improvement?
That's a great question. So my assumption is if you're interested in having an equity audit, it's because there's an equity gap, that currently there's some sort of performance data or something that's indicating that something's wrong. And so how you would measure success is moving of the needle with regard to those achievement, performance metrics, with regard to representation, if that's one of the areas of concern, with regard to shifting of curriculum, with regard to students not dropping out, with regard to students successfully graduating in 4 years. Depending on where the equity gaps are, that would determine where the metrics need to be in order to measure if the needle is truly moving, in order for there to be either a claim of success or a need to go back to the drawing board.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Morris.
Thank you. Have a good night.
I will follow up with the two of you later this week.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
All right, board, time for our discussion. Any comments or questions on these presentations?
Well, I'll comment. So, I mean, from what I've heard, I much favor the first group from UNC Charlotte because of their quantitative analysis and the depth they're going in to look at information, you know, because I really, I mean, information from focus groups, that's okay, but, you know, there's probably some insights to be had, but basically people coming there are people that just have, you know, potentially chips on their shoulders or things to get out, and that could be totally skewed and biased. And the goal is to have unbiased opinions here. So that is where quantitative numbers will tell you that. So I really like what the first presenter had to say about his analysis and the depths he was willing to go into. The question I would have is, what kind of data do we have to provide that guy if we were to go with him? And, you know, I would say if it takes 3 months or 4 months to go back through, you know, DOS type information in order to get enough data to give that analysis, then that's what we should do. We shouldn't just rush out whatever we have readily available, but really get it.
I agree with you, Ravi. I think that the first presentation, from Dr. Lewis for the Education, Innovations, and Solutions, it seemed like his timeline was a lot better than the second one's timeline. And I think that he would also do a thorough job. Also, cost-wise, I think it was more effective for us as a board.
I mean, I'll chime in. I think that, I mean, I guess, you know, in the perfect world, they would sort of meld together and be a superpower of equity audit, because I feel like there were a lot of important distinctions made in the second presentation about sort of like, I think, deep understanding of a district and walking alongside people and really trying to understand holistically the needs. I felt like, I think that's possible with the presentation given by Dr. Lewis. I did get the sense that the district needs to be prepared to be very active in that audit. I felt that there was a lot of, what does the district want? That is what I will do. What is the so there needs to be very clear goals, expectations that the district is actually, like engaged in and energetic about and mindful. And so sort of like in the spirit of the energy and the awareness of cultural times, I just felt like, you know, making sure we can bring all that to what is needed and then maintaining that. There are both presentations, I think we need to consider more seriously, like sustainability. We're still kind of, I know, at point A, and we're trying to get to that end of that, you know, line, but what does sustainability look like in either of these situations? How do we most effectively use any of this audit information? So, I mean, I was really hoping for like a super clear picture, but yeah, I think that just being very, very present as district leaders, and if we go with the EIS group.
I think it's
Just l-
hard, I think it's hard to have this conversation and really only talk about these two groups, these two presentations, as if we didn't have a third presentation as well. I personally am still leaning more towards the first group. While I like the two presentations today, it was good info, I do agree that the EIS would maybe rely too heavily, I actually wrote would rely too heavily on the district. I expect for an equity firm to really come to us and tell us what they need. I need this data, based on what I see, these are groups of people that maybe I need to speak with. I felt like it was a lot of what the district wants and I kind of heard, I think a few times, the expected outcomes, which is a concern for me, and maybe it's just the way the terminology was used, but I don't have an expected outcome that I want you to come back to me with. I want you to tell me what's happening in the district and what we need to do, and not really rely on me to say what I think is happening in the district. So I'm not going to say I wasn't impressed, but that particular one does not rise to the top at all for me. In fact, it's at the bottom. The equity imperative group, I certainly, thought that they had, a good plan with phases. They came with more, these are the things we're going to do, here's the timeline. But they aren't experienced in actually doing, what we're looking for them to do. Although, a lot of the piece that's missing for them is more so the focus groups and the interviews, and I feel like that is something that probably, they could do. They seem pretty heavily focused on the piece that comes after the audit of, I want to come into your district and help you make those changes, and those pieces are great. But I really would like to see somebody who's maybe a little more experienced with the type of audit that we need in our district. And I just kind of felt like that was more of the first group more than the two groups that we saw tonight. And that's just kind of my personal opinion. If we were just talking about tonight, I kind of would disagree and say, a lot of the equity imperative stuff was, definitely a little bit of a higher scale, but it is also coming with quite a high price tag as well, and maybe not as much experience with what we're looking for as a district. So that's my thoughts. But not to knock either of them, I thought that they did well with presenting what they can do and what their firms are used to doing.
Just to
I just
clarify. Sorry.
wanted to say one other thing to follow up to what I said a moment ago, and that is, the equity imperative group really sounds like a professional development thing on equity issues. And so I just want to say that it doesn't mean that if we choose a group that is the only group necessarily. You can have EIS come in and do the quantitative analysis and do everything he proposes. And then maybe you do, if it is identified as needed, professional development with the equity imperative group. You can kind of mix and match a little bit, I think, to some degree. But regardless, you need to have annual DEI training or professional development independent of this audit. So the thing we have to recognize is there's an audit and then there's professional development. And they're two different things, but do go hand in hand.
Yeah. I personally think that, that the qualitative piece can have rigor, and can be repeatable. I think sociologists could speak to that. The focus groups could certainly be done in a way that could lead itself to something that people just, dumping out their feelings, right? So, all that, and it can be distilled in a way that it can find trends, et cetera, et cetera. So, we can't completely ignore that piece. But, all that said, I think I'm where Laura and Robbie are in that these two groups, these two presentations tonight were extraordinarily complementary pieces of a whole that we need. I think that the first group is by far more capable in giving us the statistical analysis that we're all looking for. But that's just part of what we need.
I echo that, and I think that that's what I was hoping to get out of these presentations was we've done not exhaustively, but we've done a lot of anecdotal research ourselves as a district, and especially Jennifer, since you came on board, and Brandon's come on board, and I've taken part in talks and things, and we can get a lot of that ourselves. But what I really was interested in was the deep dive into the numbers, and when Dr. Lewis said that he'd go back as far as we had data to provide for him, but also understood, and I'm not a data cruncher, but it sounded to me like he will be able to tell the difference between apples and oranges when, say, looking at data for special ed students versus kids who are in the dual language program versus different age groups and grades levels. And I really want to know what that is going to reveal to us beyond anecdotal evidence of how we feel we're doing or other people feel we're doing, because the numbers will be there for us to review. So I'm leaning towards Dr. Lewis's group, EIS, but I do see the strengths that everybody else has pointed to the other two groups. I'm trying to remember back when we had the presentation several months ago from Systemic Educational Equity, isn't that what it was called? But I got the feeling that that was going to be a lot more professional development, and I really just want to get the numbers first before we make any decisions about what kind of development we even need until we know what we're looking at. So I kind of appreciated that discussion with Dr. Lewis.
I'd also like to mention, just the vetting that was done by Dr. Caffey. I think it's important for us to allow the people that we hire that are in these professional roles to really have a big piece in helping us with making that decision. That's what we hire them to do. That is a part of their profession. It's not a part of any of our professions, regardless of how much we want to come, and of course we all are here to make the best decision. We also charged a committee that I think we have lost sight of. That committee, I think it's certainly lost a lot of momentum, and I think that some people on that committee have the feeling that we did not trust them to do what we asked them to do, and we've had some fall off, and I think it's going to be hard to get some of those people back. So, I think it's worth mentioning to us, that while our role as board members certainly is to help with making the best decision for the district at the end of the day, if we were gonna, I guess, be to the extent that we are in this process, why did we actually put this committee together? I mean, that's just a thought. Maybe it's a question you can answer. If not, maybe it's something you can think about. But I think that, for us to sit here where we have invested in a position for this to be a portion of that position, and to basically not trust that professional to do the work that he is trained to do and was hired to do, is not really in our best interest as a board or as a district. So just something for you to think about. I'm not saying that I should put Dr. Caffey on the spot right now, but I do think as board members that it is in each of our best interests to be thinking about that, and maybe be having a conversation with Dr. Caffey to get his thoughts, because again, he's the professional and we are not. So we can sit all day and talk about what we think these groups do, but he's done this for a living. So, it's kind of like you come and telling me what I should do in my profession when you have no experience in it, or maybe have little experience. And so I think we need to figure out ways to get that committee back to being vibrant like they were in the beginning, and I don't know that we can get back there at this point, because we basically in so many terms have told that committee that we didn't trust the work that they did or the decision that was made, and what they did was not good enough, and so bring us more. Whether we look at it that way or not, that is certainly the feeling of some of those members.
Well, I do have to point out, though, that the committee only looked at the first group. They had that. I mean, that was the only group that was brought to them. So it's like a little unfair to categorize the group is being insulted. I mean, the group did like the first presentation. It didn't really have the issues that other people in the public did. But you know, that was the only thing that was brought to them.
But they also trusted, you know, again, back to what I initially said, they did have trust for the person that was hired to kind of handle.
I mean, I do think that we are still considering recommendations from Dr. Caffey's collected, well-thought-out list. I mean, I think the benefit of any of those groups is actually being seen in conjunction with other groups. I think it's actually a disservice to only see one presentation from the first equity firm by themselves.
And I'm not saying that I disagree with that piece, but I am saying that us here making this decision right now, we should all be also
totally. I think that like
the
part
person
of that
we hired in this position,
realizing sort of that maybe is like that's why we are here now, right? Is saying that like we need to see more to understand what we're choosing. Like we need to collectively hear from these many professionals.
Right.
So I mean,
right.
I
like
think
I
it's
said,
important
I don't disagree
to,
with that piece, but I you know, I think that we all should be having that conversation as board members with the professional that we hired as well.
But my sense is that's exactly what we're doing, and I'm actually shocked that I sort of thought we would turn the table to Dr. Caffey first before we offered all of our opinions, simply because if, you know, the suggestion is he's vetted these people, so I really wanted to hear, we were brought one at the beginning, we had some, I think, very fair concerns about her presentation. Members of the equity task force had concerns and put their foot on the brakes. So we have two new ones, very different. So I know we said don't put him on the spot, but I would, if you don't mind, Dr. Caffey, I'd really like to know your thoughts on the three, how these three managed to be the ones that came to us, and what you see as the relative strengths and limitations of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, let me say that going through the vetting process, one of the reasons why I brought Dr. Dubiel and her group to the Equity Task Force first and foremost is because there was tangible examples of her work that other school districts had made public and available. All other equity auditors that I've reached out to have entered into non-disclosure agreements, and when asked for tangible examples of their work, they were unavailable. In conversation, they all have their strengths and their potential weaknesses. But the fact that what I liked about Dr. Dubiel was the fact that I could look at her work, there were examples, and any gaps that may be perceived in her work, she was very forthcoming about saying that we could address those issues as we saw fit. And so that the report would not be finalized until we were completely satisfied with the results in terms of, so if there was weaknesses in the quantitative that members of our committee, the task force, saw, that she could go back and conduct deeper dive in terms of the analysis. And that was the biggest pushback, honestly, that I think I've received from her presentation. Again, all the other vendors that I've spoken to directly, you know, one may be focused a little bit more on quantitative, one may focus more on qualitative. I, as a professional in this field, you know, I lean more towards the qualitative. That's what my doctoral work was in, qualitative research in terms of equity and how it transforms school districts. Of course, there's a need for the quantitative piece, but what I'm going to always place more emphasis in my work in terms of issues of equity is the qualitative piece, because you can know the numbers, but the story behind the numbers is going to give you more information in terms of truly transforming your district. And that's my perspective as an educator. And I understand that others may differ. And so I think in this conversation between the different equity auditors, you know, we can continue to bring others forward. I think you'll hear similar presentations to the three that we've heard so far. I think it's really just at a point in time now where the board has to make a decision about in terms of what they want to see happen so that we can move forward, because what I don't want to do is become a hamster on the wheel and we keep killing time, bringing more and more people for presentations, and then a decision is not being made, and then the work is not being done. And so that's my quick response to the question at hand.
Dr. Caffey, thank you. That's one of the things that I was going to point out was just the timeline. I mean, the sooner we're able to get started, the sooner we could start forming these groups of stakeholders and everything else, because not only is the firm or the group that we choose going to be doing a lot of the work, but our district personnel will be working too to help them to gather this information. So I think the sooner we're able to pick someone, the better, so we can get started instead of, like you said, just prolonging and prolonging and prolonging without getting anywhere. So,
I mean, I don't hear anyone right at this point trying to prolong the, who we have to choose from as a firm, but I do think it's really important as a district that we take very seriously who we are hiring, how much it is costing, and so it's actually important to spend the time. I get that it is within a range, but it is equally important to spend the time vetting organizations and companies in what they're doing. We historically, in Champaign-Urbana, have done equity audits, and they haven't necessarily resulted in what we want. So I think we're being charged at this point in time to be very, detailed, thorough, and exhaustive.
yes, I agree to that, but I also believe that we need to set forth the standards as a board, just like when we put bids out to get work done on our buildings or anywhere else, we do have a time frame. And so I think that part is very important also. Granted, we do need to do a lot of the work. We don't want to just jump at this decision. I didn't mean that at all. But when we heard from the first group, that was back when, Dr. Caffey, do you remember?
November.
I was back in early November.
All right, and here it is already February, so by the time we
And so-
technically,
Yeah, and so to that point, I would add that, I want us and I want everyone in our organization to be extremely comfortable with whomever we go with. But in terms of the equity audit, of course, the best ability is always going to be availability. And we have already lost 2 potential consultants for even offering proposals because now they have booked up just from the time that I started this process back in August, vetting different companies that they've now have already have signed contracts with the school district. And so I'm not even able to bring those organizations to the forefront for consideration. And so I don't want us to rush this process, but time is still of the essence.
thank you, Dr. Caffey.
I just want to make 2 points. One, Dr. Caffey did do an exhaustive vetting throughout the state. The reason we brought Dr. Dubiel is she is a well-known factor in the state of Illinois. She leads several state board groups. She leads the Illinois Consortium for Equity within the state of Illinois. I'm not knocking either of these 2 people, but the EIS person is not even from Illinois. I mean, he's done most of his work in the South. The other point I want to make is I think it is really interesting that most of the criticism that came from the board level and from the public was looking at samples of Dr. Dubiel's reports that were public, and again, reports that districts signed off on, that they were okay with. And tonight we're looking at people we can't even, we're just going on whatever they're telling us tonight, because we do not have examples of their work. So I just wanted to point that out. People can come and make a great presentation. They can give us a great packet. But one of the reasons why there was so much criticism for Dr. Dubiel is her work was public. And I just wanted to say that out loud.
I'm curious if there's any precedent as far as it seemed like you had the capability as a superintendent to reach out to the districts and kind of ask them.
Sure, we can talk to them about the relationship and what they thought.
Did that happen at all from any of the schools that?
No, I have not done that because it was made very clear that this was now going to be a discussion held at the board level. So we wanted to have this discussion here first. Now, if you guys are leaning more toward the EIS, Dr. Caffey and I are happy to reach out to, he can reach out to their director of equity and I can reach out to the superintendent. Once Dr. Lewis provides some contacts for us, we're happy to do that between now and the next meeting.
I just want to clarify that earlier when the question was, what does the board think of these two groups we talked to tonight? And I said the first group, I was not talking about Dr. Dubiel's group. I was talking about EIS. I think EIS blows away the other two by far.
Yes, I think
You
we
know.
knew that, Robbie.
Yeah,
We
To
understood
say-
that.
To say, I actually had a conversation about data analysis with him, whereas the second group from tonight is like, we don't even do statistics, why bother,
Yep.
So I think you need that, and that is what we get from you.
But my fear is that's all we're going to get.
Well, that's what you need to start with, and then you can move on to the second piece on your own or with somebody else. But you're not going to get that piece with either Dubiel's group or, the people from Chicago. And the guy saying he's from North Carolina, the Chicago people will be just as available as the person from North Carolina, So.
So, at some level, we have to decide what is our role in this process, because it's becoming less and less clear, I think, as we move through this meeting. And, from my perspective, I think it is a healthy process for the board to identify strengths and weaknesses publicly about these. But at the end of the day, we can, I think, still make the decision that we are going to say we like this, we don't like this, and turn it back over and say, all right, this is now a decision that you're going to bring somebody forward. We are offering our advice. I don't personally want to be responsible for, telling the Equity Task Force or Dr. Caffey what he should or should not do. But I also think there are very clear differences among these three, and we're going to get something very different. And if we don't know what that is, we're going to get ourselves into trouble when we get it back. And I've sort of been quiet about my assessment of what I heard tonight. I think we already all gave our opinions on the first one last time, and it's further back in my memory. I'm very appreciative of the idea that we did get to see a whole lot more, and we could vet her proposals and her work. That is both a strength and a limitation, because we now know the limitations of what's in those reports. Is that a fair comparison? Absolutely not. But we know what we're going to get because they all looked very similar. We're going to get something that looks probably very similar to what we already saw. From my perspective, I agree with Ravi on the EIS person. That is a person who can do sophisticated analytics. We're going to get a very solid quantitative document. He has qualitative analysis on here. I don't know if that's his strength or not. I haven't read his books, but he's written a lot in the area. He's an academic who's spent a lot of time in this area. So, I do think at the price point and what he's offering compared to the last group, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. I have deep concerns with the equity imperative when I look at their bid at $60,000. I look at statistical analysis that's costing $250 an hour. I will share that on campus, when we have grants, we put forward a call for statistical analysis at the PhD level. It costs $150 an hour on campus. I don't know who charges $250 an hour. What I heard from these folks did not instill any faith in me that they could perform statistical analysis. They essentially said they don't have the programming capability to do it, and said they would do something very basic. So I'm just concerned that a price point of $250 an hour for data analytics and a lot of hours, I'm not sure we're getting an equity audit that will be beneficial to our district if this group is on the table. But again, at the end of the day, I really do hope that Dr. Caffey and the Equity Task Force is going to listen to what we have to say, not as a directive, but as suggestions for how they proceed. That's just my opinion.
And that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier. I think you said it a little better in your description, that we obviously are seeing the pieces that we want to see, but that the decision is, going back to them, and with the expectation that it's going to produce, those pieces that we are interested in seeing, and that we would hold whoever is selected accountable for what it is we're looking for. So.
Any more comments or questions for Dr. Caffey?
No, I just have a comment, I guess. I feel like, granted, the results we get from this are gonna be helpful in our strategic planning down the road, which we know is coming up. We have been kind of working on some pieces of that. But I think as a board also, we need to really stop and think about, and as a district, what we want from this audit. Because if we don't know what we're looking for, I mean, obviously we're looking for more than just professional development. So we need to really come up with some points on what it is that we're looking for, what we want to find out, and how this group, whoever we choose, is going to be able to kind of bridge that gap so we can keep moving forward towards a strategic plan.
Yeah, we have that, Brenda. I mean, that is what the Equity Task Force has been working on for months and months and months. So we have a direction. We just need the person to help facilitate us to get us there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I apologize for that.
No,
I
no,
just,
it's a good point.
All right, any other comments or questions? I mean, it looks like, go ahead, Jennifer, please.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it seems to be the will of the board to basically
Yes.
ask for an administrative recommendation through Dr. Caffey and the Equity Task Force on how to proceed.
And we have a meeting on Thursday, so one of our points that we were going to share with the group is kind of an update from tonight, and kind of, where we saw the board might be leaning. And again, I think we have a little bit from all three providers to kind of look at. But we were going to have a discussion with the task force about this on Thursday.
And we can send them a link to the YouTube video of this presentation.
Oh, yes,
and
absolutely, we
and the
can.
board as well, so they,
Yes, and we'll
task
share all
force
the
can be
documents ahead of time.
prepared.
Would it be possible to also provide a link just for the previous presenter we had back in November? So I was just thinking to myself, oh, I gotta go home and check out the YouTube channel because I want to
Sure.
refresh my memory on her presentation.
She actually presented to the task force back in November, so
Oh,
a
okay.
while ago, so
Okay.
yes, yep.
Anyone else have any comments? I also want to thank you, Dr. Caffey, for doing all the groundwork and extensive research to bring these two groups to us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Before we move on to our next study topic, I'd like to thank Anna Seaman for running our AV tonight. The next up is standards-based grading update. Kim.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to focus on our district goals and take a look at those, and just to kind of revisit what we've touched on in the past, as you've heard about our SEL goal, our math and literacy goals, as we've talked about the MAP assessments, or it could be with our professional development and letters training. And tonight, we will continue to focus on equity and examine our equity goal, in particular focusing on equitable assessment practices. We will have the pleasure of hearing from Mrs. Erica Uscali, our curriculum director and student learning. And she has been leading a lot of important student learning and curricular teams. But tonight she's going to focus in particular on the standards-based grading teams and the work that they have done thus far, and outline that and the work that is ahead.
All
It's all
right,
yours,
thank you,
Erica.
Mrs. Norton. Good evening, everyone. It is so nice to be with you tonight, and I know that you've had a long night already, and so I'm anxious to share some information with you that I hope you will find encouraging and somewhat progressive, and something that you can hold on to and think is a good thing that we are doing here in the district. We have a lot of great things happening in the curriculum instruction and assessment department. And as we began to think about the district goals and the things that we needed to do to support our district in reaching those goals. One of them really stood out when we began to think about things like grading practices. I know that Mrs. Norton has shared these goals with you over and over again. You've seen them many times, but tonight we're going to focus on goal number 4, because this is the one that, this is one of the ones that really stood out to us as a department as we were thinking about how could we address and support the goals of the district. So our goal number 4 is looking at providing equitable access to culturally responsive curriculum, and also looking at equitable assessment practices so that we can ensure social and academic advancement and educational opportunities. When we think about that from a lens of equity, we want to make sure that this is something that is available to all of our students. And so as we began to think about what could we do differently, what did we need to do differently, we began to focus in on our practices around grading and assessment and reporting. I would like for you, if you would, to think about when you take your car to the shop. It may be just to get an oil change or a tune-up, or they do that however many point inspection that they often do. But if they came back to you and gave you a piece of paper that said, well, today your car got a B+, would that be good enough? Would you wonder, why is it that my car didn't get an A? What was it missing? What was it lacking? Where did my car fall short? Well, a lot of times that's what happens with our students as well. And so I show you that analogy share that analogy to show you that sometimes our traditional grading practices don't allow us to share the whole story of what is happening with a student and the grade that they are receiving. When we think about standards-based grading, instead of looking at a single overall grade, what we do is we break the subject matter that is being taught down into smaller learning targets. A learning target is something that we would consider to be a teachable concept that is based on the standards that we are using. And it's something that we want students to be able to master, something that they should master by the end of the course. What teachers then do is they track student progress. They're able to give appropriate feedback to students and then adapt instruction in order to meet the needs of students. The other thing is that grading is based on the demonstration of mastery, because ultimately we want students to be able to master the standards that we have been charged with delivering and teaching our students. And so if we think about it back to that car idea, if the service person gives us a B+ on our car, we may not know what that means. But if they give us a detailed report that says this is what's happening with your engine or your battery or your transmission, then that helps us understand what is happening with our car. And it's the same way when we think about fair and equitable learning and grading practices. So in Urbana right now, we are working on shifting our mindset about grading in our district. So a few things that I want to share with you today. Standards-based grading is something that is very important and something that we are trying to really get a handle on so that we understand fully what it means and why it is important. A few things that I want to share with you about this, that in standards-based grading, a teacher would present a new concept and do the introductory lessons. And as students progress through the learning, then they are offered more complex material. So as they are ready, more complex material is given to them so that they can continually move toward the target of learning that they are trying to get to. Also, we know that standards-based grading allows us to have equitable practices with our grading. And some people look at the term FAST. They look at that it is fair, that it's accurate, specific, and timely. And so we know that that's so very important because we do want our grading practices to not only be equitable, but to be fair to all of our students. It also, the other thing that we know with standards-based grading is that it's based on evidence of mastery. It's not based on someone's opinion of how a student has done. It's not based on if a student got extra credit or if they turned something in late. It's not based upon if a student has access to multiple resources or access to very few resources. It's based on mastery of the key skills with the standards. Also, another piece of standards-based grading is feedback. Feedback is really critical for our students and for our families. Within standards-based grading, it allows both teachers and students and families to know the current level of proficiency, and then they can all work together to set goals for improvement. And so that's a very important piece because that helps students to buy into their learning, to be part of their learning. And so they are a partner in learning and it's not something that's happening to them, it's something that they are involved in. We also know that our elementary schools have been using standards-based report cards for several years. So I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, there was an initiative in the district for standards-based reporting. And at that time, the district worked very hard to establish some priority standards and to put together standards-based report cards for our elementary schools. At that point, we weren't really ready. I was not here then, but this is what I've been told. We weren't really ready for middle school and high school to move forward at that time. At this point, they are very ready. They are anxious to move forward with standards-based grading, and that's very exciting. So if this would bring some consistency across our district, it would allow for parents, for students to understand that these are the remarks, these are the levels of achievement, the levels of mastery that students got to as in elementary, and those same kinds of things could then follow them into middle and high school. So when we decided that we really needed to focus in on grading and look at our practices and think about what we could do differently, one of the things that we felt we needed to do was put a team together to help with making some decisions and guiding some of this work. And so I want to share with you some of the things that we have done so far. We began this work in the spring and it continued then over the summer, but then in the fall, we really wanted to give more emphasis to this work. And so that is when we put together a standards-based grading oversight team. The members of this team, there are 15 members currently. They are from various grade bands across the district. They represent various roles in our district. We have everything from special education to multilingual education to different curriculum and instruction leaders from across the district who are part of this team. The team meets every 2 weeks for about 2 hours each time. I can tell you that those 2 hours are never enough. We always have so much to discuss and so many things to think about from a variety of lenses that in the end, 2 hours is just never enough, but we do limit to 2 hours every 2 weeks. We have done a lot of work to study what other districts are doing because standards-based grading is not some new a new phenomenon that's out there. It's been around for a long time, but we have taken the time to really look at what are other districts doing that are being successful with this. We've looked at districts that have maybe not been successful and some of the things that they struggled with so that we could address those. We've looked at their policies, we've looked at plans, we've talked to people, we've watched videos, we've done all kinds of things, and we are still doing those things. We have not exhausted our list of people and districts to talk to. We have also established a district vision for standards-based grading. And from that, we then established some tenets, some things that we believe about grading in our district. We've also put together some common terminology so that we as a district can begin to speak the same language around grading. We are in the process right now of trying to finalize a district timeline. I can tell you that this is not a fast process. It takes time because there is a lot of work involved and there are lots of decisions and things that we need to consider so that we are being fair and equitable to our students. So we are finalizing a district timeline at this time. We also have encouraged our buildings to begin working on building level plans so that they can move forward in completing some of this work as well. At the same time as doing standards-based grading, we have sort of a parallel path happening with our curriculum process work, because in order to move forward with standards-based grading, we have to establish things like priority standards across our district. And so there is a lot of curriculum work that is also happening with our teachers at this time. And that will take us from priority standards all the way to unit development based upon those standards. We also this fall have 2 pilots that are happening with standards-based grading. One is at Urbana Middle School. The Language Arts Department is doing a pilot of standards-based grading at the middle school. And at the high school, our biology team is doing a pilot of this work. We have also enlisted some support from an expert in this journey and his colleagues as well. We have contracted with Rick Wormley, who is an international consultant, an author, a speaker, and truly he is an expert on standards-based grading. Rick has been very available to us anytime we have a question or a concern. He is right on it, and he comes to our aid and helps us understand and think about the things that we need to be considering. He's done several presentations for our district. He's worked with small groups. He's presented to the district as a whole. And he has been with us since April the 1st. That was the first time that he did a presentation for us. He will be here with us. He has a few more presentations to go, including at Winter Institute, but then he will actually be with us in person in April. And so we are excited to have him here where we can talk one-on-one with him and really dig deep into his knowledge and see what wisdom he has to share with us. So I mentioned that one of the things that our committee, that our team has done is that we've established a standards-based grading vision for our district. And I'd like to share that with you. In creating this vision, it was important to us to tie back to the district's overall vision. And so you will see some wording that is similar. So when you look at this, a few things that I want to point out. One is the phrase, all learners to achieve personal greatness. That does come directly from our district vision. And we feel like that is so very true for standards-based grading, is that it is helping all of our students become great, to achieve the greatness that is within them. Another thing that I want to point out are the words equitably, accurately, and consistently communicates learning progress and achievement. So again, going back to the whole basis of why we began talking about this in the first place was because we want our grading practices to be equitable for all of our students. And the other thing is we want those grading practices to be accurate so that when a student gets a grade or gets a report, they know exactly what it is that they need to improve on and the things that they are doing well. We also want our grades to be able to communicate the progress that students are making, not just a final mark, but really the progress that they are making. And then the last thing that I want to point out is at the end of this vision, where it says that it establishes a clear and meaningful profile of each learner beyond a letter grade. Again, when we look at standards-based grading, it will allow us to see what it is that a student needs to do to improve on and areas where they are already strong. It will really help us to guide students and help them to be more than just an A, B, C, D, or an F, to feel like they are more than that. It will help them to see where their strengths are and where they need to improve. I also told you that we not only established a vision as a team, but we also then thought about what does grading mean to us? What do we believe about grading as a district in light of this work that we are doing around standards-based grading? And so we came up with 6 tenets or 6 beliefs around grading that I would like to share with you as well. So a few highlights on this. One being that in this first bullet, clearly specified learning goals. Kids will know exactly what it is that they need to be learning, and then teachers will help them get there. It's very important to note that all of these learning goals are based on the standards that we have been given as a district that we must address and that we must teach. Another thing is multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery of those standards. This is not a one and done thing. When a teacher engages students in working toward the standards, they really do work together And students are given multiple opportunities to show that they know what they're doing, that they are making progress. So if you think about, for example, a sports team does not go out on the field or out on the court and they have never practiced before. They have to practice and they have to work on their skills in order to go out and win the game. It's the same sort of thing with students. We want them to be able to practice, to learn new skills, to reach small goals until they can then reach their larger goal of mastery. Another piece that I would like to highlight is that students play an active role in their learning. As I've said before, this is something that teachers and students and parents are doing together. It's a way for us to really work together to help students, again, not feel like education is being done to them, but that they are really part of their process and they are invested in their own learning. Another piece is working toward looking at students' academic progress and their current level of proficiency toward mastery. So our goal, obviously, is to get kids to a point where they can master the standards, but we also want to be real and share where students are in their progress and in their proficiency toward meeting those standards. Just a couple of other things. Work habits, this is a big one. Work habits are assessed and reported separately from academic measures. In standards-based grading, the grade is about the academics. As I said earlier, it's not about things like, did I turn in an assignment late, or did I get extra credit on something, or did I have a resource or not have a resource to be able to accomplish it? Some of those sorts of things are reported separately. Behaviors are reported separately. They are not part of the academic growth that is reported. We feel like that many behaviors are very important, and we want to share that information with parents, but we don't want that to influence if a student gets an A, a B, a C, or a 1 or 2 or 3, or whatever the mark is. Then the last thing that I want to pull out here is the differentiated learning opportunities. One of the things that's so important when we think about grading and about equity is that we need to meet students where they are, and that we need to give them opportunities, thinking about where their strengths are, thinking about where their interests lie, thinking about their access to materials, etc. And so to do that, we need to be able to differentiate our learning opportunities that we are giving to students to engage in. And so with standards-based grading, we are able to do that more than we are right now, because with our focus on looking at learning targets, that will help us to know which students might need more support in an area, or which students might be able to progress further more quickly. And so it's very important to note that this is all about differentiated instruction as well. We have asked schools to begin to think about this vision and these tenets that we have put forth for the district. And we've asked them to think about developing their own tenets or their own sets of beliefs around grading in their own buildings. And so we're excited to see what they're going to do with that. The high school has engaged in this process already. The middle school has begun to engage in this, and our elementaries are beginning to talk about this as well. So we're excited to see where all of this leads. I've mentioned the team a couple of times, and I wanted to share with you the names of the members of the team. I've already told you about some of the backgrounds and some of the areas that are represented by our team, but I wanted you to see their names as well. So this was simply an introduction to something that we are working very hard on. As I said, this is a big process. We do not have all of the answers at this time, and we are asking a lot of questions and trying to wade through the myriad of answers that we could think about so that we find things that are the right fit for us here in Urbana. I want to assure you that as we are working, as our team is working, as our district is working, we are keeping students at the forefront, because all of this work is about students and helping them, again, to achieve their personal greatness and to find success. So we're working hard. We know that this is going to require some education of other people. We know that we're going to probably need to do some education with our parents and our community. And so we're thinking about that and how to do that and how to best help families as they are learning to maneuver. What does a standards-based grade mean? Because for many of us, we grew up with an A, B, C, D, or an F, and we all sort of have our own understanding of what that means. When we talk about standards-based grading, it changes, and we have to begin to help parents and community members and families understand what that means. And what does it mean if my student gets a 1 or a 4? We are, as I said at the beginning, trying to shift our mindset. We're working hard to shift our mindset here in Urbana about learning and about grading. And I appreciate you giving me time to share this information with you tonight.
Thank you very much. Board members, any questions or comments?
Can I ask a quick question? Just, this is my own naivete about this. So at the university level, if high schoolers are getting non-traditional grades, how do universities deal with that? Are they open to it? Do they have processes in place? Or does this create problems?
It does not create problems. We have been talking to other high school districts, some very, very successful high school districts I will mention who are using it. And so they have been able to work with colleges and universities. They've worked on some sort of a translation of sorts so that if a student gets, for example, a 1, 2, 3, or 4 as their final mark, how does that translate? What does that mean in a traditional grading system? There are some universities and some colleges that will take the information that is being shared as far as the standards-based information. But that's one of those questions that we're trying to work through as a team. And we're trying to investigate a variety of things because we do not want our students to get to a point where they say, this is great, but we can't use it when we try to get into a university. And so that is something that we are trying to tackle together and are investigating lots of answers for that.
Hey, Erica, can I share a personal connection? So I
Of
have
course.
a senior who has applied to quite a few colleges, and Erica's right. They have conversion charts where you have to go through, because they're very particular. You have to list all of your grades. So especially if it's a, 4-year college, you have to list every single math class, every single English class, what your grade was. And I don't know what colleges you guys are looking at, Erica, but in a couple that Jordan has applied to, we've seen conversion charts for GPA and also conversion charts for the letter grades. So I think the colleges are catching up with that. I don't know that every single one has, but I have seen that firsthand. So.
Thank you, Ms. Uscali, for this presentation and for reminding us what great things we can do with our kids. The piece that I really lit up at was when you talked about how work habits are being assessed differently, separately, because of course when we were all kids, it didn't really matter how you arrived at a grade just so long as you got it, and I'm sure that instilled in a lot of our older people bad work habits. And I'm really excited to know that that's a piece that teachers and families are working on together with their students, because kids don't all learn the same way. Some kids are great test takers and some are not, but they, just the way that they learn is great. So I'm really excited to know that that's a piece of the puzzle that will help our kids from the early days. And I just want you to keep coming back and giving us progress reports, because I'm excited to see how this is going to play out in our pilot programs, and how the middle school and high school kids are finding it and how their families are finding it too. So thank you.
Thank you.
I guess, sorry, I was going to respond to you, Dr. Ivor Tatum, but I was like, in the short term, it seems like we could sort of equip our counselors with some of those conversion charts for our families that might need that support. Another question, I guess, is just making sure, I know it seems like we've gone through some curriculum changes and are potentially always, there's always a chance for more. Are you finding that you're able to accommodate, because in my assumption, part of what this requires is classroom teachers to have the time and space to be observant. And so making sure that we're not, we're aligning that curriculum expectation within the human kind of connection expectation, and making sure that the teachers have plenty of opportunities for input of how that could happen well, or challenges. So just maybe speaking to that if possible.
So we are very cognizant of that and are paying close attention to our educators, because the last thing we want to do is overload them and put more on them that would potentially cause stress or anything else. And so we are trying to really, I said that this is a long process. Part of that is because we have to take the time to do this well and in the midst of everything else that everyone is trying to do. So we are looking at that. We are trying to make sure that our timelines are far enough out that teachers have time to get the work done. We are also working with other people in our department to try to find ways to be able to bring teachers in to do some of this work, and so that they're not having to think about doing this during planned times, but we're trying to find alternate times for them to be able to do some of that work, whether that's after school or during the summer or those sorts of things. So we are looking for ways to bring groups of teachers together to do some of this work, so that it does not become a stressor for each of them.
Anyone else? I do have one quick question. I know you're talking about how best to bring parents up to speed on this initiative, but off the top of your head, can you give the board or the public resources that we could read or look up with regards to the history of the initiative, the academic research that supports it, et cetera, et cetera?
I can absolutely put something together for you, if that would be helpful. That would list some of the resources that we have been using. We have quite a plethora of resources that we have on hand, as well as several places that are sort of our go-to sites for standards-based grading. We also have some experts, for example, Rick Wormley, that we tap into as well. I know that we have already talked with Rick about, would it be possible at some point, could he potentially speak to parents? Could he even speak to the board when he's here to be able to share some of his insight as well? But I am happy to put together some resources that you all can begin to look at, that parents could begin to look at to help bring them up to speed.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There is no call for future or executive meetings. Superintendent's report.
Okay, and I apologize. This one is pretty full of information, but we have a lot going on, and John's gonna pass me the clicker. Thank you, John. So a lot of information, so bear with me. I know the hour is late. It is the year of the Tigers. I wanted to start off with something fun. Yay, Lunar New Year started today, and it is right up our alley, the year of the Tigers. So happy Chinese New Year to all of our families. Right now, we have been messaging winter weather updates. As all of you who on the board who are parents received a message earlier today, we decided not to prolong the waiting and have anybody up at 5 a.m. wondering what we were doing today. So we did go ahead and message that we are closed tomorrow due to the upcoming storm that is probably on its way as I speak. We will be messaging tomorrow what the plan will be for Thursday. I know a lot of districts, when you get home tonight, you'll probably check the news and see many districts have already taken off for Wednesday and Thursday. We were really trying to wait to see what Friday's outlook would be so we could maybe message Thursday and Friday together. But right now the plan is we will let families know tomorrow by 4 o'clock, hopefully earlier. But we'll be watching the weather closely, and I'll be collaborating with Randy and his team, Tyler, to see what the road conditions are like and how bad the travel really is while they're out and about in the community. So stay tuned, but tomorrow is an e-learning day. Students should have all of their work. We did message this early enough so our middle school and high school students could take their Chromebooks home. So hopefully all students were able to do that. And yeah, we'll stay tuned. Booster shots. So we are working, we just started working on a booster clinic. We set the date just yesterday, Thursday, February 17th. That is the Thursday before Winter Institute. That date was intentionally chosen We have had a lot of staff members that have had needed booster recovery, who were sick, had side effects. Because of our sub shortages, we can't afford to have a large number of our staff out on a school day because we just don't have enough subs to cover that. So in collaboration with UEA, they are also working and really stressing to use this weekends, because we know that we've already indicated that the 22nd will be an e-learning day. So we're going to encourage as many of our staff members as possible to get their booster. I think we talked about this, we have talked about this at a board level, but I'm not sure if we've talked about the other two extenuating circumstances. So we've talked about the fact that being fully vaccinated now includes having a booster shot. So we have a large number of our staff who have not received their boosters, so therefore they're not considered fully vaccinated, which impacts whether or not they have to test regularly. It will impact, the governor has a bill that will be put forth hopefully soon regarding COVID leave, and staff members who are not fully vaccinated will not be able to take advantage of those additional COVID leave days. So we're really trying to get in front of this. We've been asking staff to upload their updated vaccine cards. Those are coming in slowly, but we do know we have a large number that are not boosted yet. So we're going to work with CEPHD to offer that Thursday, February 17th. We'll also invite 12 and over students interested in a booster to get those at that time as well. COVID testing. I know we've been having a lot of conversations here about utilizing the shield testing a little bit more. We also messaged to the community that we have been experiencing some delays and decreases in the number of tests that we've been receiving. This week's shipment of tests was half of what we usually receive. So in an effort to, one, try the PCR test with more students other than the middle school and high school students, as well as kind of keep more of our rapid tests in reserve. We're shifting starting next week to offering shield testing at the Comcast site for staff. We've tried that a couple times. Not all of our staff members love it. Some of them clearly prefer the rapid test, but we will continue to offer the rapid tests on Mondays and Wednesdays. That second bullet is really important because this is a change for families. So drive-through testing at Yankee Ridge, which happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Thursdays now, that will shift to leaving Yankee Ridge and going to the Comcast, the old Comcast building, our building site now at Vine and Fairlawn, and we'll be offering shield testing there instead of rapid. The reason we need to move it from Yankee Ridge is when we offer the shield test as a drive-up, people have to go sit and park and do their dribble. It isn't as quick as, driving up and swabbing, so it does take a little more time, and people aren't able to sit in the drive-through lane. The parking lot at Yankee Ridge is pretty full after school. So Thursdays, drive-through testing will now move to Yankee Ridge, and it will be PCR moving forward for the rest of the year. Okay. We are going to be providing, there we go. As you know, we approved our open gate threat detection system at a recent board meeting. At the crisis committee, we planned a threat detection demo. We talked about what that would involve. We're creating a video for the students. We're going to demonstrate to students how they can use the pass-through for their Chromebooks. So hopefully we'll have the demo made. The loss of these couple days this week to make our video, not having kids, is going to hold our video up a little bit, but the demo has been set. Our trainer will be here. He'll work with the staff at the high school, administrators, SRSs. But we also want to open up this opportunity for the community and for families and students to come. That will be Wednesday, February 16th from 4 to 6 at the high school, of course. We'll notify people where to go exactly once we have set it up, and we'll think about if that's going to be in the Commons. It might be at door 9. We haven't made a decision about that yet, but it will definitely be Wednesday, February 16th, 4 to 6 at UHS. Black History Month. So as you know, today is February 1st. Tori has on her Black History gear, her celebratory gear today. So today is the start of Black History Month. This year's theme is Black Health and Wellness. Several of us right here in this room were out at Dr. Williams on Sunday, kicking off Black History Month in honor of Mrs. Mitchell, as our student ambassador mentioned. It was a really nice crowd. It felt like her spirit was definitely there. It was something that was really important to her as a former parent, as a staff member, and something she did quite often. It was wonderful to see so many people from the community, not USD 116 people. I felt like we were kind of in the minority, and there were a lot of people there from the community celebrating with us, so that was a great event.
And today would have been her birthday.
Yes, and today, thank you, Tori, for reminding me of that, and today was her birthday. So Monday, February 7th is NAPID Day, and as you know, that is a long-standing tradition in our district. We've been sharing the virtual plans for NAPID. So I just want to encourage families to go to our website and check out the NAPID plans for your school. UHS Curriculum Night for our upcoming incoming freshmen was scheduled for tomorrow night. That has been rescheduled due to the weather. So we are sharing this out. The high school is sharing it out, but I wanted to say it here publicly as well for our incoming 9th graders. That will be next Thursday, February 10th from 6 to 7:30 now. The 5 Essentials Survey is open. We have been sharing this as well. Participation rates are low right now, but it always is low to start off, and the schools are really going to be pushing that. Unfortunately, the survey closes before parent-teacher conferences this year, which we usually use that as a way to really get that last push. But I know our principals and our administrators are doing a good job of getting this out to families. It is completely anonymous. So follow that link, and you can go in and really share just your thoughts about the effectiveness of your school. So please do that if you haven't yet. We just wanted to share a reminder. We have a couple of maps, but we'd like to have the opportunity to look at a few more sub-district maps. So the deadline to submit those is March 1st. That is the night of our very first meeting in March. So we'll be looking at those, I'm assuming, Paul, at the next meeting on March 8th maybe, or will we want to wait till April? But we can discuss that, but the deadline to submit your map is March 1st if you haven't done so yet.
I think the board starting March 8th can determine how to start analyzing
Okay,
these.
perfect. All right, so that will be the plan. And we've linked there, and when Catherine puts this out in the board update tomorrow, so that link will take you to the step-by-step directions to do that on our website. And now to some of the celebrations of our students. UHS Swim and Dive. The swim team took first place overall in the 3rd annual Tiger Invite. There are a couple PRs set that night. So next week they will be competing in the Big 12 tournament. So congratulations to Swim and Dive team. UHS Winter Guard. We always get to see great news from the UHS Winter Guard every winter. So they placed 2nd in the regional competition just this past weekend. The lyrical flag routine qualified them for the state finals on Saturday, February 12th. Isabella Brown, the captain, also qualified for the state finals based on her flag solo, and she's pictured there. So congratulations to Winter Guard. UHS Wrestling, 2 weeks ago at the Big 12 tournament, 2 of our athletes wrestled their way to 2nd place finishes. So Andre Hunt and Deonta Hill, congratulations to both of those young men. And last but not least, we have our upcoming dates. We've talked a lot about Winter Institute. Kim, please remind me we have not shared out the, is the Google site ready yet to share with the board? Not yet, but very soon. So they can start looking at some of the choices. I can't remember if it is either, but as soon as it's live, we'll share it, because since it is virtual, it'll be nice that you can participate and zoom in. And we have some wonderful speakers 75. So we're really looking forward to it. And then I've already talked about that long weekend. We have President's Day on Monday and an e-learning day set for February 22nd, that Tuesday. And that is it.
Thank you. Board reports.
I had one. I just wanted to say there was a very nice article in the News Gazette about the Mammon family. Cameron was just initiated into the UHS Hall of Fame, and they've done a lot for the wrestling program in Urbana. Their whole family has, so.
Thank you. Any other board reports? All right, hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Member Orr?
Yes.
Member Hall? Member Hasanadka?
Yes.
Member Ogalski?
Yes.
Member Carter votes yes. Vice President Exum?
Yes.
And President Pulaski?
Yes, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Yes.